Soul Eater, by this point, is considered a classic in anime. No matter who you've seen talk about anime or is into anime, there is a very high likelihood that someone has said that they have watched Soul Eater and that they would recommend it to basically anybody. And it makes sense. It has a lot of the classic shonen staples, as well as a very interesting story, cool powers, a very bonkers and different world that you see from a lot of different series, and very engaging and interesting characters. But the one thing that anyone that has seen Soul Eater's anime knows is, from manga fans, the anime diverged from the manga very heavily, roughly halfway through the anime's run. It took some elements from the manga, but it went its own direction and ended before the manga ended up ending. And the manga was, in fact, monthly. And so for the longest time, I myself have wanted to get into the Soul Eater manga and actually see what the differences are between the anime and the manga, and where the anime story goes from where the anime decided to diverge from. And thus, I'm here to do a blind review of the Soul Eater manga. However, this isn't really so much as a 100% blind review, as I know for a fact the story of Soul Eater's manga is the same as the anime up to a certain point. So, for a little while, these videos are just going to be like brief recaps and my thoughts on each of these individual arcs that I will be giving my thoughts through, the artwork, how Okubo has done with his characters, so on and so forth. Won't be super book by book, beat by beat, what's going to happen in each chapter with individual fights, unless I deem it worthy. So this first part of this multi-part review of Soul Eater's manga is most likely going to be relatively short, as I'm only going up to the end of the Uncanny Sword arc, which I believe is within the first 6 episodes of the Soul Eater anime, and that's up to chapter 8 of the manga, if I am correct. So this is mostly just going to be me pointing out the differences fairly early on between the anime and the manga, and just give my brief rundown on what these particular moments in these arcs are as I'm going through them. I originally was planning on just going volume by volume, but then I realized that would kind of take forever, and I didn't want things to be too fragmented. And this is the perfect excuse for me to get into fully committing to reading Soul Eater and sharing my thoughts with all of you guys. And I'm also planning on other manga that I've been putting on hold to make videos on as well, like D. Greyman and Shaman King. I tried doing this like 2.5 years ago with Magi, but I wasn't able to follow through after the first blind review for the first arc. But now I am buckled in and I am here to talk to you guys about one of my favorite anime and to finally see what the manga is all about, Soul Eater. But before we dive into things, don't forget to like and subscribe and hit the notification bell for updates on future videos. It really helps, and it shows you guys enjoy the content I make here on the channel and shows you want to see more. These blind review series videos are still very much of an experiment for the channel, and I really hope these do well. Obviously, this is inspired by Totally Down Mark doing his blind review series of all these different big shonen anime and manga, so I really hope I can start doing these things for a series that I've wanted to get into, and I know for a fact, based off of some friends' recommendations and what I've heard in the community, have been very good. So please give me the time. I will make sure to make these series worth your while. Now, with that out of the way, let's jump right into things. So before I get into each of these individual arcs, like the prologue and everything following that, I just want to state that there are some pretty stark differences between the anime and the manga of Soul Eater. One of which being that we don't hunt Kishin souls or Kishin egg souls that have become so corrupted that they're close to becoming Kishin. The students of the DWMA actually end up finding actual humans that are devouring the souls of regular people, and thus eventually they would be created into a Kishin. And that is a very interesting way to change things, because this essentially means that the students that Death himself is training and nurturing to make sure that there are no Kishins are essentially out basically executing a bunch of different criminals, murderers, and just the worst type of people, essentially. Bad people, more or less. And that's a very interesting change that the anime decided to do, and I kind of get why they would do that, so they can make things a bit more supernatural and not make it seem that these kids are going off just doing actual executions in public. At least that's my interpretation of it from this instance, so I'm not sure how this was made to be a difference, but this is a very stark difference from the anime, as this shows that it takes a lot to become a Kishin, and that any regular human soul can become one based off of these interactions that we've had through the prologue and subsequent arcs. That's a whole different layer to how these kids end up having to deal with these things, because they can only reap souls that Lord Death deems that need to be reaped. So that is a very interesting change that we got right off the bat. Also, something that was mentioned by Manga in these early chapters, that she made Soul. I don't know what that means. It could just be that she helped make him the weapon that he is today, or she literally helped turn Soul into a weapon. This is still fairly early on in the manga. I don't know how much has changed in terms of the lore between the anime and the manga. My experience with Blue Exorcist is that expect things to be altered around or even flat out omitted or changed in the anime between that and the manga. So I'm looking forward to see how things play out with that. Also, another stark difference between the anime and the manga, which I kind of should have expected based off of Fire Force, but the Soul Eater manga is incredibly hornier than the anime right off the get-go. And look, fan service, it happens in a lot of different anime. I don't mind it all too much as long as it's not overshadowing the plot the majority of the time, and it's not overdone to hell. That was one of my main criticisms of Fire Force, though I kind of get why, story-wise, that is a thing in there. But in here, within these first 8 chapters and the 3 prologue chapters, there was fan service in almost every single one of these. In some ways, I'm like, okay, that's whatever. I can see why we could lead into that. And some moments that I'm like, what the hell? Why was this here? This was not needed whatsoever for this scene or for things to progress. I knew Okubo was a horny guy. And believe me, I follow Hiro Majima, the guy who self-admits that he is horny as hell the majority of the time. And I will go on record to say that the guy knows how to space out his fan service all the times and doesn't make it bog down the plot like 90% of the time. But still, he still waited a bit before in Fairy Tail to start doing more fan service. Eden Zero really leaned more into it. But I wasn't expecting the fan service to be so more present in the manga of Soul Eater than it was in the anime to this extent from these earlier chapters. Obviously, it's not that much. It's not a lot when you really get into it. But it was a bit of a shock to me in comparison to the anime, if I'm being completely honest with you, which toned things down a lot more to my surprise. And I'm curious to see if that will continue through the rest of Soul Eater, or if it's just a few moments here and there just for breaking of tension. Because Blair, basically the poster child of Soul Eater, from what I've seen from the anime, is the fan service character. And so I'm kind of thinking that's going to be the same for the manga. But those are only the real big differences, I will say, about the anime and the manga right now. Obviously, some things might catch my eye throughout the future of the story, but we'll get into the actual stuff that we see in the manga. And so, the prologue chapters actually are one-to-one, more or less, from the anime and the manga. Which means that I don't really have to go through things beat for beat. We got Maka and Soul's introduction with the introduction of Blair, as well as Death Scythe. We also end up getting Black Star and Tsubaki's whole thing with Mifune and Angela. And then later on with Death the Kid and the Thompson sisters with their fun dynamic, one of my favorite dynamics in the series, that isn't Black Star and Tsubaki. It's essentially beat for beat what we got in the anime with their each individual episodes for these prologues, as these are the length of full-length chapters for a monthly magazine, so it makes a lot of sense. And even though I know with a lot of future reference from stuff that happens in the anime, I still like the introduction to these characters, though I can see, based off of other people's first impressions of Soul Eater, that Black Star would definitely be the hardest sell at the beginning of a series, but throughout the read, they will end up really enjoying Black Star as a character and Tsubaki and their whole little dynamic. The remedial course where Black Star, Maka, Soul Eater, and Tsubaki have to go off and find what happened to Sid, how he died, and then end up having to fight Stein, all really great as in the anime. Obviously there is some, I'm going to be honest, some kind of unnecessary fan service in this instance, which I can see why some people can find it funny. I myself personally did not find it funny. I just facepalmed to an extent with that moment. I'm not going to show it. YouTube can be a bitch at times. But moving on, the introduction to Stein was honestly really great. The manga with Okubo's art style, even though it's a little Mickey Mousey at the very start with a lot of the character designs and a bit too bubbly to an extent and too round with certain instances, he does still manage to catch the air of menace that Stein's first introduction into the story was. as us not knowing that he was going to eventually become an ally. And I'm going to mention it here, but this is a lot of praise that I need to give Okubo for his first real big series, and that is his artwork when it comes to depicting the action scenes. I didn't really mention this much earlier, but for a lot of instances, whether it be Blackstar's fight against Mifune, Death the Kid in the Pharaoh's Tomb, or right now in Stein's fight, and in some instances with the Sid fight earlier, Okubo's early art style, while roundish and Mickey Mouse-ish like I just mentioned, is still really good for depicting action scenes. While I can see that he's going to improve in the future, I was shown a random image from the manga in some way, shape, or form on Twitter. I'm not calling it X. And I know for a fact, not only does his art style improve, but the way he depicts action scenes are a lot more interesting and dynamic. And that's not to say that earlier on in these first volumes, he does a great job at depicting the action scenes, whether it be the panel work, how the characters are drawn, or just the sketchy detail in showcasing really big hits that are done in individual fights. Like whenever Blackstar does his Soul Wave to hit an opponent, it is very sketchy and has a great use of shadow to really emphasize the hits and how strong that these blows can in fact be, while also selling us that Blackstar is a very strong fighter when it comes to actual combat. And even later down the road with the Uncanny Sword section, it showcases a lot with just pure raw emotion when needed to be depicted, and that's something that later down the road when I've read Fire Force, it is very heavily shown with how Okubo likes to depict certain instances of emotion or just sheer anger, rage, or even just baseline artwork as a whole. He does a great job with his artwork and depicting emotion and knowing how to set a tone whenever things come out. And I think early on, I see instances of this really quickly, and it shows that he had a good grasp of what he needed to do to sell a moment or a piece of a fight or just some sort of impact from these early chapters. But from what I was shown from just somehow randomly getting spoiled on Twitter, I know he gets staunchly better at what he does when it comes to action scenes or depicting character moments or just designing or his art style in general. So it's just something I just wanted to gush about for a few minutes because that is something that is very cool. Now, I do like how we had Stein's whole introduction, his fight with Manga and Blackstar, as well as showcasing that this was just a test and that now he's their new homeroom teacher. This is actually one of my favorite things about Stein. You can't really tell what he's thinking most of the time. He's either the smartest person in the room or he's someone that just tends to let things go without really much of a fight because he thinks it'll be interesting and has his weird dissection quirks. And he ends up being the most badass character in the entire series. Plus the Witch Hunter attack that Maka and Soul end up doing, from them messing up with the fight with Sid to them actually managing to successfully form the attack and then having it get stomped by Stein, who is just that much stronger than them and has a much stronger grasp of soul wavelengths than most people, showcasing his talent and why he is essentially the strongest Meister in this universe, is a really great moment, and I like how it's depicted. Because this also does a good way of showcasing how soul resonance and the connection between the Meisters and the weapons and the perfecting how strong they are in combat and how their overall personalities tend to either clash or improve upon each other, determining their overall strength and just effectiveness in a fight and their own compatibility as weapon and Meister. While it is relatively obvious, the way it's shown in the manga is not too bad, and I kind of like how it is depicted to an extent with them bickering, their attack not working or even being well balanced, to later down the road with them being completely in sync, to even though being defeated was their best showcasing of how strong they can be in a fight. So I really can't wait to see more of this being depicted in the manga, as this, I know for a fact this is a very important plot point when it comes to this power system of weapons and Meisters. It's something I've always found interesting about Soul Eater, and I cannot wait to see and dive into more of what Okubo has planned for the series. Next up is Kid entering the WMA and meeting Soul and Blackstar. That whole fight was still honestly very hilarious. I liked their dynamics and just whole big contradictions between all these different characters and how they react to one another and their own individual character quirks. I found this moment funny. I liked Kid's soul resonance. It looks very cool, and I legitimately cannot wait to see more of it in the main manga and see more of Kid. He is my favorite character in this series, with Black Star being very close behind him. But moving on, one of my favorite instances of this story was definitely the Demon Sword. The introduction of Krona and Ragnarok is very different in the manga than in the anime, in which case we literally smash cut directly with Krona just basically surrounded by a bunch of thugs in Italy, as Maka and Soul are just happening to be in the area, as Maka senses all these souls just straight up disappearing. The anime and the manga do a really good job at just selling the air of both menace and uncertainty of Krona as a character, as Krona is essentially more or less an anomaly, with a weapon dwelling within the Meister's body, and the weapon soul essentially being vastly superior than the Meister's, and Krona kind of not being mentally sound. As well as the fact that we have Medusa obviously behind the scenes watching and manipulating things to go how her experiment might want to go, with Krona wanting to make Krona an actual Kishin, to create a Kishin herself. And I'm going to say this now, I don't know how Medusa is changed for the future of the manga, but the thing I've always liked about her in the anime was how she always seemed to be in control of the majority of these situations, to how she always seemed to be like the puppet master for a lot of events or certain things that end up happening within the story, just a lot of times out of her own sheer curiosity. And I'm curious to see how the manga is similar, the same, or even diverges certain aspects of her in the future with her motivations. So she was always one of my favorite villains in anime, and I cannot wait to see how this manga fully explores her more than what we got in the anime. So, Maka, Soul, their confrontation with Krona was always my favorite in the anime. That was one of the episodes that I couldn't wait to get to whenever I did a rewatch of the anime, and the manga did not disappoint. I liked how disturbing it looked for Ragnarok to just burst out of Krona's body like this horrific monstrous goop until we get to see what Ragnarok actually looks like. And the actual clash between Soul, Maka, and Krona is very much a desperate fight, and it's a good way of showcasing just how big the world is and how out of her league Maka is at the start of the series, and that she needs to get stronger, same with Soul. And this showcases the bond and sense of responsibility between weapons and Meisters, as Soul is fully committed to being the weapon that he is and to protect his Meister in a battle, while Maka is very concerned for Soul's safety over her own well-being, despite having to be the one to be the fighter, wielding the weapon that is meant to help amplify her powers in order to deal with these specific situations. And when Soul is eventually cut down by Krona and bleeding out on the floor, leading to a very dark and desperate situation where they are essentially dead until Stein and Deathsight end up showing up to save the day in one of my favorite moments of the anime, showcasing not only how badass Stein is, but just how strong of a pairing him and Deathstar can in fact be, and the different utilizations of how weapons and Meisters can use their powers, and how just Stein has a very strong understanding of souls and soul wavelengths with his variety of movesets to the point where he can fight without really needing to wield a weapon the majority of the time. And the fight itself was honestly really awesome, and the way Krona uses his black blood and how Ragnarok ends up being kind of a menace himself, showcasing how twisted Medusa's experiment is when creating this Kishin with the black blood, and just how unstable Krona was to begin with anyway, and that this whole weapon Meister hybrid thing isn't fully sound, at least right now, based on how the fight ended up ending. And Medusa having to grab Krona and hightail it out of there by unleashing her Soul Protect. So, yeah, I like this moment in the arc. It's always one of my favorite moments, showcasing this desperate fight between Maka and Krona, setting up this soon-to-be pseudo-rivalry, essentially, in a sense, and just how big of a threat Krona, and by extension Medusa, truly is to the plot of the story and what exactly they're planning. What does she mean to do by using this demon sword to create a Kishin? There's a lot of questions that need to be answered, and I legitimately love seeing mysteries like this pop up and having moments where we seem to have the main mastermind and some extension of a villain group forming that will be a thorn in our sides for the rest of the story. That's always something that I like in any type of story, as it showcases a long-term goal and also gets us excited for whenever these characters tend to show up. And the idea that some of Ragnarok's black blood got into Soul's system and will play a bigger part in the future of the story with the demon that's in his subconscious and how he's starting to feel differently is a major thing in this story, and I'm honestly glad that this also leads to Maka gaining some sort of self-awareness that she herself needs to get stronger for Soul, so that she can be a better Meister, so she can achieve her goal of creating a Death Scythe and making Soul as strong a weapon as she possibly could make him. But more importantly, so her friend doesn't end up being in the exact same situation that they were in previously, in a hospital bed where originally she wasn't sure if he was going to make it out alive. So this is a very nice instance to have at the beginning of a story that sells you on why these characters want to get stronger and sells you on their personal relationships, on how strong of a bond they all have. It's something I always liked about Soul Eater with the Weapon Meister pairings, always having very strong bonds and looking after each other. It's something that a lot of series really do struggle with sometimes, and early on in this manga, it showcases that the dynamics and the relationships between these characters are key to what make this series so special. Not to mention, it plays into how this whole power system of weapons and meisters work, and I'm just very glad that this is explored more through the characters themselves and their own inner struggles, leading to future development. We also get a single chapter where we get to see the GOAT, the myth, the legend that is Excalibur, and Kid and Blackstar defining him, the hilarity that ensues, and also actual lore about the Kishin and the very first Kishin that appeared in the world of Soul Eater being placed in this, honest to God, what would it be considered a filler chapter, but is it really filler if we get the best character in the entirety of Soul Eater in this chapter? Excalibur is just the greatest, and I want more Excalibur. But yeah, moving on, this does add into more of the lore of the Soul Eater world, from introducing us to what's essentially supposed to be the strongest weapon ever that can match with anybody, but has such a unbearable personality or an annoying personality that no one really wants to match and pair with him. Even Stein couldn't take Excalibur's whole big personality, which I found hilarious, for the strongest Meister not being able to take care of the strongest weapon. But the main thing about the Kishin in this chapter that Sid explains to Tsubaki and the others is a very big instance of what drives things in the series to go towards madness. And that a lot of times it's fear and the fear of death. And that's how we got the first Kishin, by them reaping the souls of good people or people that weren't on death's list, corrupting their souls and driving them and becoming the first Kishin. Very good instance of lore in a chapter that otherwise would be considered a filler by most people. So I like that the idea of what the Kishin is and how it was integrated into this world and how it's a big warning for others. While it can feel a little clunky to some people, I do think this is a nice, good place to put it in, to give us a bit of an idea of what a Kishin is and how one ended up forming in this world. As a lot of times it goes down into fear and just one's insecurities of the unknown as well, or just the weakness of the soul to an extent, and succumbing to some dark thoughts, which ties very well into the Uncanny Sword arc Masamune, where we dive into Tsubaki's backstory and her and Blackstar's whole relationship. This was when I really started to fall in love with Blackstar. Seeing his whole big guy personality, wanting all the attention in the world, just wanting people to know he's around, and then seeing that his whole backstory is that he was a baby to a clan of assassins that basically wanted to do anything for money. They were wiped out by the DWMA, and he was raised there, but still, because of who his family was, he was still ostracized by a good chunk of people who were victims of the Star Clan. And I like in this arc, Tsubaki, after hearing this from Blackstar and Blackstar trying to push it off as nothing as he gets more and more attention, their strong bond and how they know each other, Tsubaki instantly knows that this does bother Blackstar, what his family has done and how this has left a change in his life that he himself is wanting to alter for the future, and doesn't want that to be his legacy based off what I'm getting from this whole chapter. Thus also adding to him wanting to surpass the gods and being his own person and outside of the Star Clan that has been eradicated. And also just how insufferable this whole village is, that they don't listen to reason or any big signs at the start. which ends up making me want Blackstar to punch these guys in the face and eviscerate them for being absolute dicks. Heck, even that one guy that was going to bash Tsubaki's head in when she was obviously unconscious and unable to fight back. You guys ain't the morally high ground people that you think you are if you're in that situation. But speaking of this arc is primarily focused on Tsubaki and her brother. And we dive into Tsubaki's backstory with how she gained the powers of transforming into all these different ninja weapons, while her brother only had the one sword technique, which was the Uncanny sword. And over his sense of his own inferiority, or just feeling pitied by his own sister and family and his circumstances, he wanted to master his sword and the way of his powers, and through that he chose to go the path of the Kishin, possessing people with his soul wavelength by overwhelming them and then devouring their souls in that instance, thus growing stronger and stronger by devouring more souls, and to eventually become a Kishin to reach his ideal self. And based off of how things were in the previous chapter with the Excalibur portion, how we got the first Kishin, it goes to show that one way that people end up going into to become a Kishin and eating these souls is out of fear, out of insecurity, out of succumbing to these dark, twisted thoughts that are in their hearts, leading them down this path. And Tsubaki basically being portrayed as someone who will just roll with the punches, comfort people, and not really try to rock the boat. That being a main conflict in her backstory with her brother, always basically taking her brother's side and doing what her brother wanted and not wanting to do what she wanted, would essentially be considered pity to her brother. And she, to an extent, most likely did, as she was basically compared to the flower of her name that has no fragrance. Essentially that she has no real differences amongst other people and just more or less compliments others. But in this big clash of the souls, this really awesome action scene between brother and sister, we see Tsubaki just throw it all aside and just be like, screw that, I'm going to show you what I'm capable of. This is the real me. I'm not going to feel sorry for you anymore. As she more or less takes more control of her life and to be who she really is and not just buckle down to her family or others when the time arises. When it comes to a relationship with Blackstar, she knows who he is, and they fully understand each other to the point where there's no real hiding it. Tsubaki knows that Blackstar is a good person, and Blackstar showing how much he cares for Tsubaki in probably one of his best moments that isn't a fight, which is essentially his restraint towards the villagers. Just sitting there, getting beaten over the head by multiple people, head bleeding, just waiting for Tsubaki to return, just watching over her, and being her emotional support. And that is very awesome to showcase that he has not only the restraint to just not care what people do to him, but the second someone tries to interrupt or do something to Tsubaki, he will snap and threaten to kill someone. This showcases their strong bond and how, despite on the surface level, not only do they care for each other, but they will put aside what would be their more or less base character traits for the other or for what's important. And this arc is definitely most likely leading for Tsubaki to speak out more and not be more of a compliment to others, but also want to just express herself more and not just be the ultimate support and compliment to others that she initially is presented as. And I cannot wait to see where this leads with her character. Blackstar showcasing his restraint and belief in his partner to the point where he doesn't care if he's beaten, and is just a really great and amazing moment for his character, and I cannot wait to see what ends up being expanded on throughout the future of this story, as at the end of this arc, Tsubaki defeating her brother and getting her soul unlocks the Uncanny Sword mode, getting all of her brother's abilities and probably being the strongest mode that she has for Blackstar to utilize. And for it to be immediately undercut this cool moment with Blackstar immediately losing consciousness as it drained all of his energy in one go upon activation. So this was definitely an instance of Tsubaki herself truly earning a power-up or a mode change, and I like moments like this in anime and manga where someone's transformations, changing of modes, or new abilities / attacks are through character growth and confronting something from their past. And so this was definitely well earned for Tsubaki, and now we have Blackstar who has to train and eventually go through his own developmental stage to utilize the Uncanny Sword. How this differs in the manga from the anime from what I've seen, I'm very excited to find out. But through all of these opening arcs, it showcases Okubo not only has a plan for Soul Eater and its characters, but he is slowly drip-fitting us the casual points of information that we need for its world building, how these abilities work, and giving us the base character dynamics and motivations for this series that we could expect to see in the future. I like this read-through, while I do see some of these differences as honestly big improvements, primarily with the difference being that we're using actual human souls and there isn't quiche and eggs, but just base human souls, just bad human souls. It's a very cool difference from the manga and makes things a bit darker from what they initially seem. So I'm curious to see where all this does in fact lie in the future. And I mentioned this with the artwork earlier on, but throughout these opening chapters, you do see Okubo's artwork change and evolve throughout each individual chapter as he is slowly but surely getting the art style that he is known for. It's a very quick improvement from my honest opinion from what I've seen, and like I said, he's good at depicting action scenes, raw emotions, and the Tsubaki fight was definitely one of the bigger instances of how he's utilized his combat choreography, his artwork, how he panels stuff and draws things out when it needs to be, and he knows how to set a tone with his drawings. That's very evident early on, and I can't wait to see how this ends up being fully utilized when he improves to reach what many would consider his prime as an artist. But that's really all I got for you guys today. This video ended up being longer than I initially planned it to end up being, but let's see how things go with the future of this Soul Eater review series. I hope you guys enjoyed my ramblings on what I liked about this series, my thoughts on things. Things can obviously change with future videos with my thoughts on characters, the story, the power-ups, etc. Or just my whole media literacy as a whole potentially being completely wrong and warped by other series that I can notice different things. Because I know for a fact I might have gotten something wrong primarily. I have to expect I've gotten something wrong about character arcs. But hey, I haven't rewatched Soul Eater in 2 years. And I am reading the manga for the first time. So I expect to be completely wrong about certain aspects. But what did you guys think of this video? Are you big Soul Eater fans? Did you like how I presented this video? I'm going to try and make things a bit more structured in the future. But for now, I'm experimenting with these blind reviews to be just me talking about these different series, what I liked about them, and my honest opinions. This was definitely a strong start to Soul Eater. The artwork and paneling quickly improved from what we got from the prologue chapters. We obviously got good instances of these character dynamics. We got good seeds for the world building and base foundations. The main antagonists right now, Krona and Medusa, obviously, are set up fairly early on, as I remembered they would be. And I just liked everything from these opening arcs and chapters, so I can't wait to read more and see what else Okubo has in store for the series, and what else could potentially be different for the story. But leave your thoughts and opinions down below about Soul Eater. Don't spoil anything beyond what I am covering in these videos, because either people are reading alongside with me after seeing this, or maybe there are certain instances of the manga that anime onlys that could potentially be watching this, like myself, who was reading the manga, might not want to be spoiled on. So please be mindful of spoilers. I also might cover Shaman King alongside Soul Eater as well, because I've read a good bit of Shaman King and I want to make videos on what I've read so far, so expect that as well. So with that all out of the way, I hope you guys enjoyed this new experimental series of videos I'm going to start doing on the channel. Looking forward to hearing your thoughts. And with all that said and done, I hope you all have an awesome day.